Is there any change for you, or is it mostly on law enforcement side?
So it's a common question that we get from a lot of companies, and this is like existing clients. Again, we focus on education, so letting people know what sort of testing options are out there. So the biggest thing that we hear, obviously, with law enforcement is the roadside saliva test or oral fluid. And again, this is where they take a swab of the inside of your cheek. The officer will get a result within, say, 8 minutes, but it's just a screening tool. It's not to confirm that, yes, Joe is high or whatever the case is. It's just a detection to see if it's present in the mouth. But again, it's not an impairment test. We just know that it's in your system. So then what that law enforcement would do is take them back to the police station or go to a hospital, and they would do a blood collection or a blood draw. So that's what's happening with the law enforcement side of things. And with DriverCheck, a lot of it's not really changing for us because out of all the different technologies out there, the instant oral fluid test results not the most reliable. So it's not to be confused with a lab-based oral fluid test. So same idea of swabbing the cheek, but it actually gets sent to a lab for confirmation, and so the technology is better and more reliable and defensible.
Okay, so that's where the change might come in, is where it's sent to as opposed to where it's
So, and like the biggest thing there, like people ask us, well, what do you recommend for this job or this function or this occupation that we have? So it really comes back to the company. So when people are looking at urine testing versus oral fluid testing as a whole, urine testing has a longer detection window. Because like, say if I'm a weekend warrior and I smoke joints, every Friday during my poker games or when I golf on Saturdays, whatever the case is, there's a high likelihood that I'm always going to be positive for THC. Because cannabis will stay in your system longer than a lot of the other ones. So it's not really fair, according to some people, for me to be tested for cannabis because it's going to be legal, October 17th. What oral fluid testing does, and again, I'm speaking specifically about lab-based, it shortens the detection window to realize, did Jeremy have a joint on his way into work? Did I have it during my lunch hour? So instead of looking at the last 30 days, it's shortening that detection to a few hours to maybe a day. But it also comes back to the strengths. So one thing is like cannabis is evolving, so a lot of the potency of it is getting a lot more stronger than what people used to use in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now, back in the 70s, cannabis would be 3% THC. Now we see it as high as 30%. And then you have other types of spin-offs of cannabis from shatter and butter that can be upwards of 90% THC. So at the end of the day, it's going to stay in your system longer. And if you're a smaller person versus a bigger person, it'll go to metabolize differently too.
I want to talk a little bit about safety-sensitive positions. Because driving, yes, we know that's safe. But there's a lot of people who may be in a safety-sensitive position and don't know it. And the scenario you brought out earlier about the person on a forklift and hit you or whatever. People go to work all the time, drive the forklift, and they don't think they're in a safety sensitive position. They're just moving that tote from here to there, right? So how is there a specific policy that is there working at somebody who's going, I'm not even sure if I'm applying for a safety. I'm applying as a warehouse person, but I would be driving the forklift. Is that safety sensitive position, or am I just in the, is there a way to tell? Do you guys have a list on their website, or how does this work, right?
So really that's a good question. It's really company specific. So, I mean, you can generalize that the trucking industry as a whole would be considered safety sensitive. And when I say trucking industry, are you driving a vehicle?
But if dispatch drops the computer on their foot, that's another one, right? And that's what I was thinking.
Or even making like bad decisions as dispatch. So again, it could be safety sensitive or what some people call safety critical. So maybe I manage a hedge fund. Maybe I'm making financial decisions on behalf of my investors, and I'm looped out of my mind on something and saying, "Oh my God, this seems like the best buy ever."
Are the investments growing? Because that's going to change us.
There you go. That's right. Yes.
We're doing really well. Okay, keep going.
So really, it comes back to like that company and what they define as safety sensitive. And one company might define certain positions, the forklift driver, maybe they deem that role as safety sensitive, and part of their program might be to drug test that individual, whereas there's other organizations that might not. So it really comes back to the company's own definition, and they would work with either a lawyer, their HR team, us, policymakers to decide what is safety sensitive to them.
So that's something that all all companies should have that in place right up front. Because, like I said, if I'm applying as general laborer, what does that really mean, and what am I going to be doing? You know, I might only be unpacking boxes, but if I have to use the knife and I'm high, you know,
there you go.
the strap, you know, that's different, right? So, great. Okay, so you mentioned a couple of ways that drug testing will be done on the side of the road. Is it going to be the swab? Is that kind of the one that they'll see? What do you think drivers are going to see after October 1st as far as...
Okay, so law enforcement will be doing the roadside swab test. Yeah. So there has to be a reasonable suspicion that you've been using cannabis. So they smell it, or your eyes are, you know, really bloodshot, or you're slurring your speech, whatever the case is. Yeah. But that'd be like the roadside swab to screen. Okay. And if that comes back positive, which means you have it in your system, so you failed the test, they're going to take you back to the police station and do what's called a blood draw, and that would confirm. And they have different levels for what they consider as, if you're over a certain threshold, you will be charged with like a DUI. Okay.
Very good. Well, it sounds like a lot of a lot of things for people to get into. So, where can someone learn more about some of these? That one about the safety sensitive positions seems really minor, but boy, if you don't have that listed, that might cause problems down the road should somebody get hurt or be charged or whatever.
Yep. So, like, if people want to learn more about what safety sensitive is, you know, you can check out our website, DriverCheck.ca. You can call us. Happy to talk with anyone to help educate them. Because if you don't know what safety sensitive is, it sounds like you need more than just to read our website. I mean, you can do a lot of work with Google these days. But we're happy to walk you through and help you, point you in the right direction. Because the first step is to get your policy in place. Yeah. And inside that policy, you can define what roles would be safety sensitive.
Should somebody applying for a position somewhere be asking that question? Like, maybe I'm just applying at a company. Should I be asking, do you have a list of safety sensitive positions? Maybe I'm already using it medically, like I'm allowed to use it. Yep. And so does that deem how you apply? Because a lot of people are still stuck on this question. I don't know that, you know, I'm using it legally, it's medically allowed. Yep. So now where do I apply for work? Right? Yep.
So we've heard that question before, and every company is a little bit different. So we'll have people, companies will come forward to us and say, you know, we've had a person self-disclose that they use cannabis that's legitimate. It's not going to a dispensary on the side of the, on any street in, say, Toronto, Hamilton, whatever. But it comes back to that role. So there is certain things that will disqualify you from being a driver. DOT specific, you cannot have cannabis, whether it's medically authorized or not, you cannot. Same thing with like insulin dependent drivers. So it's going to evolve over time as to what can and can't be accepted. But what a company will do is they'll work with us and we'll investigate it to find out, is it a safety sensitive role? Is whatever the ailment is, technically the employer, unless they have an occupational health department with physicians and nurses, they can't ask those tough questions, whereas we can. And we can't disclose that back to the employer, but we can make recommendations for certain ailments as to, have they tried any other medications? And we hear all sorts of stories that, you know, there was one lady recently who was using cannabis for menstrual pains. Or some people who might use it for a sprained wrist for just for quick healing. So there's a lot of things you got to see. Yes, it might be a true authorization, but have they tried any other medications? And if you really want this job, are you willing to try a different medication, or do you really need the cannabis? And at the end of the day, like if the company's safety, that individual safety, and the general public should be more important than that person not getting the job.
I don't know if you'll be able to answer this because I know this is probably not your role, but have you ever seen it where someone thought they were taking a certain medicine, but something else was in there? And the reason I'm asking that is all the fentanyl deaths we're hearing about, where people may not even know that's in there, so they're taking medical marijuana for whatever reason. And I think that's regulated too, like who you could buy it from and stuff, right? But I was thinking, has that scenario ever come up to where somebody found something else in a drug that they didn't even realize they were on?
So, great question.
I don't know if you can answer that because I know you're the marketing guy. I don't know how to put you.
No, that's fine. No,
I just thought of that scenario because I'm hearing on the news that stuff is in drugs. You know, guy thinks he's just smoking a joint. He's got fentanyl in it or something like that. Right?
So, like, if I'm...
You can tell I'm a druggie. I don't even know how this stuff
Yeah.
works. I don't think you can put fentanyl in.
So, that'd be more like illicit drug use.
Yeah.
So, like, a licensed producer, so these are companies that are approved to produce cannabis and to sell cannabis legally to people, to real patients.
Yeah.
If someone is coming forward saying, hey, I have this medical authorization to use cannabis, but I found fentanyl in it, it tells me that they've had fentanyl somewhere else or they've been exposed. They're not... So, in theory... You could get fentanyl into it, but it wouldn't be through a licensed producer.
Okay.
Because that'd be like, say, a opioid or a pharmaceutical company producing that. So they just make me want to investigate further that they did somehow, if there's cross-contamination. But then it could be things like Tylenol 3s.
Yeah.
Or you might have a positive test result for codeine. Something that could be an over-the-counter medication that maybe someone didn't realize would show up in a test result. So even if there is a positive test, so again, you failed your test, we'll have our medical review officers talk to the individual that tested positive and to see if there is a medical explanation as to why it may have happened or not have happened. So
I'm just thinking of myself. If my doctor said, "Oh, you need to be on medical marijuana," okay, I would go take the prescription. I don't know how you would find out if that's right or wrong. He would just say, "Go here and get it" or whatever. Right? So, okay, anyway, we'll leave that alone. I won't put you on the spot with that. I just thought that was. These are how my interviews go.
So, no, like it's a good point because like what we see is a lot of the people that are getting. So first off, there's no such thing as a prescription for marijuana because there's no DIN, no drug identification number. So it's only called an authorization. Secondly, we don't normally see people with medical authorizations for cannabis getting it from their family physician.
Right.
Typically, we see it from a third-party doctor, and so you wonder why they haven't gone to the physician.
Right.
And then when we start investigating these cases, we have to talk to the general physician, the family physician, and they have no idea that their patient has these ailments that they say that they're using cannabis for.
Right.
So there is holes to the story.
Yeah.
And by no means do I think cannabis is the devil's lettuce.
Yeah.
I think it definitely can help with certain ailments, but I think there is other people that do take advantage of it, and they might go through the legal process to be authorization, to get it authorized, so they can say, hey, I got, in theory, I got my green card, I'm cool. But it's just, you wonder about the ways that they've gone about doing it. So they've legitimized it, but is it really? So
yeah, okay, good. What about, are you able to track down the doctors online or whatever? I think they're the ones who are signing a lot of this or authorizing it. What if someone's got it from outside of Canada, let's say? They've gone online, they've got some authorization to do this and somehow got past initial barriers. I don't know how you know where I'm going with that. I was trying to think of, if you were to find out, and I think it's kind of the scenario you were just talking about, if you were to find out, how would you double check that? Maybe that person's not really a person, which can happen online, right?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. So the investigation, there's a whole bunch of different steps that we do. So one is, we'll talk to the authorizing physician. Typically, you can't, from my knowledge at least, there is no U.S. physician that would be able to approve it for Canada. Okay. But then we'll look things at send us your last receipts from your purchase of cannabis from a legal licensed producer.
Right.
And say, for an example, in your authorization, it will say you can use or consume 3 grams a day. Yeah. Well, if your last receipt's from 12 months ago that you can produce, well, what have you been using for the last year?
Right.
So that tells me you're buying it on the black market. You're buying it, through your dispensaries. Yeah. So we'll look at different things like that. Just investigate the case on itself. So
there's so much to this stuff.
And it's evolving all the time.
I know. So DriverCheck.ca is where everybody should start. And then if they have any questions, give your team a call. And
you got it.
Great. Well, thanks for being on, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.